Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Political Activist Track. I am joined here with some incredible leaders from all across the country. We have all time zones here from the East Coast to the West Coast. And we are going to be with each other for about an hour. The title of this panel is called Political Activism from Campus to Community. All of these people on this call right now embody what this means. What does it mean to launch your activism career on your campus and take that into your community and take that into your career? So on that note, I'm gonna pass this on to themselves for them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go to Destiny, and then Jamie, and then we'll have one more panelist that's going to be joining us in just a few minutes. So, welcome you.
Hi, Rai. Hi, everybody. I'm so honored to be here with you all. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Yudu. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am a full-time student, a senior at Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota right now. So that's how I got in contact with Rai and Ignite and all things Ignite. And I identify as a community and political organizer. I served in a number of leadership opportunities on campus at Hamline, including serving as student body vice president last year in a number of different task force and working groups, and then also as a student coordinator for the Center for Justice and Law. And off campus, I do a lot of work around civic engagement, electoral engagement, and getting young people involved in local and state government specifically. So I co-manage a fellowship program off campus. I do a lot of work around AAPI issues, and empowering young women to get involved in local and state government. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. That's incredible. Hi, everyone. My name is Destiny Dixon. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, currently still based here right now. I'm a recent graduate, a May 2020 grad, COVID grad from the University of Oklahoma, where I studied political science and women's and gender studies. During my time there, I was a co-founder for the Black Emergency Response Team, which was a collective group of Black leaders who fought against police brutality, as well as a lot of systemic racism affecting Black and marginalized communities. Currently, I serve as an assistant for the Liberty Division of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, where I work on reproductive rights, women's rights, gender issues, gender markers, a lot of great things around that. Outside of that, in my personal community organizing work, I'm working on a lot of civic engagement around Black and Brown communities getting civically and politically engaged, as well as still working on systemic racism on college campuses. That really brought me to this work initially as an activist. So honored to be here. Thank you.
Wow, we have some great panelists here today. Wild. Hi, everyone. My name is Janie Kamara. I'm a senior at Miami University of Ohio. I'm currently in Oxford, Ohio. I currently serve as Miami's first Black female student body president. A lot of the work that I do is around amplifying student voices. I also do research at Miami with a anti-racist education initiative called Racial Consciousness, where we survey English 111 students, first-year students taking those courses, about their interactions and knowledge of racial myths. And then students of color like myself host panels where we talk about our experiences as students of color at Miami's campus, and then educate students about those racial myths that they took their series a part of. I also served as our president of the Diversity Affairs Council this past year, where we oversee all multicultural organizations at Miami. And so, yeah, that's just a bit about what I do at Miami, and yeah.
And then Pony has just been able to join us. I'll kick it to her and just tell us about yourself and the activism that you lead in Minnesota.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pony White. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a graduate of Minnesota State University Moorhead, and I'm currently a part of the Young Women's Cabinet, and that's how I know Rai. And apart from that, I am a junior associate at School Readiness Consulting. So it's a childcare consulting firm. So I work on childcare policies. I also have a history in reproductive activism. And so I've worked with Advocates for Youth and Planned Parenthood. And currently I co-lead Advocates Minnesota Youth Activist Alliance, focused on, lobbying and fighting and advocating for policies for young people's reproductive rights, like comprehensive sexual education. And yeah, I also, I guess, would say I'm a racial activist. During my undergrad, I was the president of the Black Student Union and the co-president of the Campus Feminist Organization, where I centered like the Black experience, and especially when we're talking about feminism, making sure there's space for a Black feminist. And so, yeah, thank you.
Listen, this is why I constructed this panel, is because of what you all just said that you do. So you all are not new to this conversation. You've been an activist for years now, and part of it stems from our identities and your experiences on your campuses and in your community. So I'm curious now if we can shift into our next question, which is, what does it mean to be a political activist to you? And particularly, you all don't shy away from conversations that need to be had. You don't shy away from making space when there is no spaces for you all and for all of us, right? So what does it mean to hold space in spaces that were not created for us? And then what does it mean to be a political activist in spaces that are sometimes hostile to our presence? I'll let whoever wants to start there start.
I can jump in. I think the biggest thing is so important to note that political activism comes in all forms and facets, right? You don't have to be the person holding the microphone or the person giving the speeches, but you can also be doing the logistical forms of the activism, right? I think that's something that's so strong that people steer away, like, oh, if I'm not having the microphone, I can't be an activist. Activism comes in all forms and facets. It comes through literature, it comes through the arts, it comes through, the actual organizing and getting people together, the PR, also the person maybe holding the microphone. So I think it's so important to say that taking up space as an activist, especially on college campuses, can come in many forms and facets. We had people on our teams at the Black Emergency Response Team who did the research, right? Who are actually looking at what other college campuses within our Big 12 coalition were able to pass or work within administration, while other people were trying to get our young freshmen and sophomores, first year students involved. They're one of the that's working even matters to them that happened even prior to us coming in. So we need to take up space all over the place, and it can't just be us, the leaders in those rooms, but it needs to be the people that are just starting to get into these areas involved, because those are the people after us. And the biggest thing I tell folks is, I'm not here because I want to be there. I want to be here because I want to make space for the next young Black girl coming into University of Oklahoma or coming in to the state of Oklahoma that wants to make a change, and so her life is better because I was able to make a change and make a difference and take up space for her.
I think it's a great point that you make there too. Just to kind of expand upon that, I think I look at political activism not only working within the institutions to disrupt the flow and disrupt the ways in which people think about what it means to be an advocate and what it means to be someone who is a change maker, but it's also working outside of institutions and doing research, being a person who is a community leader, being a person who's just involved in their community and is passing off that information that you're getting from that institution to people within the community so that they feel as if they're empowered to also take on that activist role. And that activist role can be from, again, it doesn't have to be the person who has the mic, who is out there talking about their story. It can be someone who's just sitting in a room talking to their peers and talking about why they should care about issues that are happening in their community. And so I look at political activism being such a spectrum of what you can do. You can be someone who's going on doing digital activism, who's going out on social media and trying to educate the communities that they exist within. It could be a person who is doing the hands-on work of going into their community and talking and getting information about the experiences that people are having. And it could be people who are actually doing that policy work within those governmental institutions and are challenging the beliefs and are challenging the policies that are in place that are used to suppress individuals of color in this country. And so I look at political activism being something like multifaceted, which is very much needed. Like, you have to take different ways and different approaches to activism in order to deconstruct the ways in which our society functions. And so that's kind of how I interpreted political activism. And I think that in my work that I've done at Miami, I've done that. Coming in as a first year, I got involved in student government just to kind of see what does it mean to be in government and understand that institution. But I also got involved in research. I also got involved in like community efforts with activism, being a part of protests and rallies on campus, being on task forces on campus. But also one of the things that happened to me this past year was a lot of students faced disrespect and invalidation on task forces that we were on. And so we left the task force because, again, as students, we come here for an educational experience, but we also come here to demand respect. And if we don't get that respect, we're going to leave because we have to focus on our academic journey through our institution. But we are also going out of our way to change the way our campus to change our campus and to ensure that the students who are coming in after us have a better experience than we had when we left. And so I look at political activism as being this multifaceted thing. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I'll hop on. I feel like Destiny and Janie really just hit the ball out of the park on this one, but I'll jump in too. I completely agree with Janie and Destiny saying that, being a political activism is a spectrum and it is multifaceted. And to me, being a political activist is simply just a person who's passionate about creating a just, a fair, and equitable and safe world, no matter what that looks like, or no matter how they get there, I should say, because we all have very unique backgrounds and lived experiences and identities that make us who we are. And we all look at the world in a very unique way. And I think that's very beautiful in some way. And being a political activist is just wanting that end result, but taking your own path to get to that end result together and to achieve liberation for all folks of all marginalized identities. So yeah, to me, political activism is just, it could be a simple, like everyone's talked about it too. It could be that person who's at the podium speaking to thousands of people, or it can just be that person behind the scenes having that one-on-one conversation with someone, and both will make an everlasting impact on people. And I think too, with Rai's question with holding space and what does that mean? I think we all can speak to, being in spaces, whether it be government or nonprofit or any field that we're in. These spaces aren't made for us and is built that way. And oftentimes people have the conversation of, we need more people of color in these leadership roles. We need more diversity in our workforce. But are we actually creating the environment for folks of color and folks of marginalized identities to actually be successful? Because those are two different things. And as someone who's worked at the state capitol in Minnesota, it's important to have folks of color and folks of marginalized identities at the Capitol holding space and advancing policy and, really create, having that representation so that people behind us can follow us and feel like they are represented and seen at the Capitol. But they don't make a space that's welcoming for us, of folks of color. And, and that's the function of, white supremacy, is to make these spaces that aren't for us, and we fight hard to be in them, and this is created to push us out and to burn us out. And we're not only asked to do the work that we're doing, we're also asked to do diversity, inclusion, and equity work on top of the work that we're doing, even though it wasn't our job description. So yeah, I think everyone said it. It's political activism. It's multifaceted. A spectrum is simply just a person who wants a world that's just, fair, safe for everyone, no matter what pathway you take to get there.
And I just have to emphasize that as students, a lot of us, I just graduated in May too, and we don't get to just learn and be students, but we have to teach. We end up having to teach. And I can't tell you how many times I've had one reading assigned and I have to do other readings just to make sure that, because that reading wasn't complete. It wasn't the full story. It wasn't the truth. And I'm often like talking to my friends, like, I have double reading assignments for every reading assignment that is assigned to me because it doesn't tell the truth. Pony, I know that you can speak so beautifully to this because we talk about it all the time. But what, like, the free labor is what this is what we're talking about. The free labor that we exert to correct what is wrong in our teaching curriculum, to correct what's wrong in our workplaces. How do you manage this? And like, what's the balance?
I guess I would say that I think innately, and I think this will probably tie into like what I had as a response for the first question. I think innately people experiencing marginalization are activists. I think we're born for, you know, room and space in this world, and we're born kind of saying like, you know, this is wrong, and what do I need to be able to exist and live. You see it from like super extremely young ages, where you see like little Black girls, like when we talk about like, oh, little Black girls, their attitude, their sass and whatever, it's like I'm fighting against a system that's telling me that something's wrong with me, and I don't know why yet, but like I know that that's not right. And so like I constantly think that like all people experiencing marginalization just are naturally activists. Now when we talk about like being organized, right, like how do we organize ourselves to kind of like meet a certain goal? I think in political spaces and like in policy, it's kind of set up to be very elitist, and so a lot of people shy away from it. A lot of people feel like, oh, like you're doing political activism or you're doing political advocacy. Nah, I can't do that. But that's somebody who, you know, they organize like a reading club in their neighborhoods, and they've worked to, you know, get books to, you know, young people in their communities, or they started a club and after school program during the summertime to make sure that kids were, you know, doing something. And I'm like, you do the work, right? Like, but here we are, we're like, the second half of it, policy, has always been set up where it's like, you're not supposed to be in this space. And so when people hear like, okay, take that, organize yourself to take those actions that you're doing to like, you know, give your community, you know, after school programs and things like that, and take it to like the Capitol, like tell them like, hey, instead of me taking money out of my pocket, and we're asking other people that are experiencing marginalization and other people who are experiencing financial oppression and downfall to, you know, give money to make sure like our kids are safe, run us money and make sure our kids are safe. And so I think that's something I will say. And as far as like back into the question you asked me, right? As far as like, where's the balance? I don't think there is a balance, truly. I think that that's something that we need to start having a conversation about, especially with our leaders, and the non-Black people of color, or the white people who kind of benefit from a lot of our labors. I think we need to start having a conversation of like, how are we getting you know, paid for that? Like, what are reparations? What do reparations look like if I'm sitting here and I'm giving you all this information? Or if you're my professor who went ahead and got a PhD and you studied all this school and you went to Harvard and you're so amazing, why am I sitting here and having to come into your office hours and tell you what you said the other day in class was racist and problematic? Like, where's that balance? And so I think like when we think about things like you know, like when people talk about affirmative action, I'm like, there's just not enough action in that. Like, because if I'm yeah, sure, you let me come into your school, but like here I am teaching at your school. So like, you know, where's reimbursement? Where is, you know, I think that students of color should have like, you know, some type of reparations, some type of financial reparations to kind of balance this whole thing out, because I don't think it'll ever be fair. And I also don't think that we should position this conversation in a way of saying like, how do we stop ourselves from being these people? Because that's saying, how do we stop ourselves from surviving? Because I have to tell the white boy in class that he just disrespected me, because that's my survival. But instead it's like, how do we, you know, say, how does he stop saying that? Like, who's going to check him? That's not me. And like, how do we educate and make sure that they stop being this way? Because I'm not going to stop surviving in a society that was created to watch me die. And so I think that's my answer on that one.
I think just Cody, you said a lot of good stuff, but just going off of that, like a lot of us got into activism, you know, because something happened on our campuses or something in our life, that we were brought into that work, right? The reason why we created the Black Emergency Response Team at the University of Oklahoma was because a white girl painted black paint on her face and said, I'm the N-word, right? They continue on, and we went and did a hunger strike because our white professors in the history department went into the N-word actively in class. In the journalism department also said that as well, right? These are supposed to be scholars and teachers. One of them was the department chair for the grad studies program, went into the N-word actively in our classrooms, right? So that, you know, in front of his Black and brown students. So it's the work that, you know, we have to be paid reparations, but we're not only teaching our peers, we're teaching people that are supposed to be scholars, are supposed to be educating us and continuing us within our own education system, but we're the ones having to put in the work, and then now going to our administration and demanding them to make a change to, you know, initially where we don't have, you know, enough, you know, people of color that are already faculty and staff members at the institution. So the people that are teaching, the white faculty and staff members, are the students that are there that you brought because of diversity and inclusion efforts, right? And it always just a full circle that goes around. And we, you know, we're not even talking about microaggressions, right? You know, this is simple things you walking down, you know, college campuses, but it's, you know, it's sad to say that we were brought to this work because we were sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? We were tired of hearing all these things going on, everything that's happening and occurring. But, you know, I think it's also super important that, you know, we say in this time, self-care, right? You know, there's been many times and moments that, you know, I've been, you know, up late at night, you know, trying to petition or organize, but also make sure you're taking care of yourselves, especially the students. You know, you're a student first, right? That's why you went through, to get a degree, to, you know, probably be maybe one of the first person in your family, or, you know, to be able to get this piece of paper, to, you know, make something of yourself. So, you know, that's what we're told, right, to do. But make sure you're taking care of yourselves while you're doing this work, because it can get very tiring, especially as you have white men 30, 40, 50 years old, you know, especially board of directors looking and saying, well, we've done a lot in the past 10 years to change what this institution looks like. You know, we're trying our hardest, Destiny, right? So don't, you know, don't take that, you'll get upset at that, but, you know, make sure you're also taking care of yourself. I want to make sure that's super important, because activism is a very, very long thing, and you can get drained out within 6 months, never want to go back to it. We lose some great people because of that. But, you know, it's a long uphill battle, and it's not going to change overnight, because like Tony said, it was a system that wanted us to die initially when we were being born. So.
Just to add on that, something that I have had, that I've learned in my year and in my term, was to set barriers and boundaries with you and administrators. Because for me, when June happened, that was like, that was 2 weeks into my role. And I was just like, whoa, I was not ready for that. But to see how like my university react to it so poorly, and then calling them out, but then getting very passive aggressive emails sent back to me for calling them out, was something that I had to tell myself and sit down and say, I can't take this. I mentally cannot take these people yelling at me for doing the right thing, of calling them out for how they have, for the inadequate response to the death of George Floyd, to the murder of George Floyd, to basically the lynching of George Floyd. And so for me, I had to learn, like when one of our high university officials told me that leaving the task force puts distrust in shared governance, I had to say trust is given where trust is received. Because in reality, when we as students go into these task forces, and that task force at Miami was made in response to Miami's poor decision, a poor inadequate response to the death of George Floyd. And when we left that task force, we sat down and said, we're not taking this. We're not taking individuals who created task force after students yelled at them for how they reacted to racial injustice in our country. We won't take us bringing up how a professor called a bunch of protesters monkeys. I was there at that protest. And we can't take when someone sits there and says, why are you talking about this? We shouldn't be talking about this in a task force that was dedicated to talking about racial issues. And so for us, we had to sit down and say, this is about a boundary we're setting. We're not taking you all disrespecting us for being in the space and saying that you all aren't doing your job right. You all aren't focusing on initiatives and community-based organization to help students better understand why they should care at this primarily white institution. And so for me, like, I really had to understand what it meant to setting up a barrier and a boundary, saying you will not disrespect me in this role because I am a Black woman in this role. Everything that you're doing that is not helping students is affecting my mental health as I'm navigating this year filled with civil unrest as we're gearing up for an election. And so that's something I've had to learn this year, is that, like, for my self-care, I have to set a boundary. I have to set a literal barrier saying you will not disrespect me because I'm telling you that you are not taking care of your students. You are not properly attending to those students of color on this campus. You are putting out statements that are not showing that you're standing in solidarity, that are not showing that you care about the students at this institution. And I think another thing that I had to recognize when it came to self-care is to just step away from my computer in general. Just step away from it. Because you will get your emails flooded with so many people saying, oh, can you speak at this? Can you speak at this event? And these are usually white allies telling you, can you speak upon these issues of race? Can you speak upon this, that, and the third? And I'm like, I'm not the only Black person at this institution who can educate you. There's a thing called Google. Maybe you can use it. And so I had to literally just step away because I was getting so many emails and I'm like, I'm overwhelmed. And so when you're looking at like activism, you have to set that boundary. You have to take that step back. You have to put yourself first in order for you to take care of your community. And that's something I've had to learn this year, is that I have to step back in order for me to be able to do my job and do my work in advocacy and do my job and do my work in activism. So that's something I wanted to add.
Y'all are definitely speaking so much amazingness. I just wrote an essay also, and like y'all are hitting some of these points that I wrote in the essay. It was a like how to care for the BIPOC in your organizations, and like what you said about like white people asking like what's up. Like I use the phrase delegatory tokenism, because it's like it's constantly like delegating everything. Like, can you say this? Can you speak on this? Can you tell this person like not to say that? And I'm like, why can't you do it? Like, why can't you tell your white friend not to be racist? Why do you have to call me and be like, yo, look what my friend just said. Can you tell her not to do that? And so I think about that a lot. But something you all said that I was like, that I also thought about is, as much as like there's work that we're doing at our universities or just in life in general, that we're pretty much going to these schools and giving like young white students like education for free, we're being used even after the fact. When you think about like when history writes about, you know, students from I can't remember the university right now, but when they talk about students from all these different universities who, you know, did hunger strikes and, you know, they tied themselves to the library and they did this and they did that, like there they are continuing to profit off of like the work of, you know, BIPOC organizers and activists. But while they were at those universities, there was no protection, you know, there was no safety, there was no reparations, there was no support from faculty. And so I think it's just really ironic how like even after the fact is like we will continue to like within capitalism, we continue to be selling points and then our communities get nothing back.
I just have to say, Pony, and all of your comments are making me think about the fact that dismantling oppression is not the job of the oppressed. Never was, and it never should be. Yet, like you are all talking about, we are dragged into rooms to speak on, participate in symbolic gestures like task forces. I can't tell you how tired I am of task forces, especially task forces that are masked as if you have a role in the conversation, but really you're there to check a box. And it's tiring, it's draining, which I've like, you know, this conversation already got to it, which leads us to self-care. Self-care is a revolutionary act when we are like constantly being attacked and gaslit from our workplaces to our places of education, where we're trying to just get sometimes I be talking to my friends like, I just want to learn and leave. Like, that's all I want to do. I don't want to teach today. I don't want to be in my classroom and have to teach. But like Pony said, this is a sense of urgency for us. We actually don't have a choice, because we know that one person that just said something racist in class and no one's going to check them on it, even though there should be someone that's checking, whether it's a professor or someone else. If we don't check it, that person's going to go off and do who knows what outside of the classroom, right? Like that's what we're constantly thinking about. All of this makes me think about, I do want to talk about self-care, but more from a, you know, sometimes I get tired of the self-care conversation because it's so like, you know, I'm just going to do a mask and call it a day. But no, truly, like, how do you center and like sometimes these spaces make you feel like you're crazy, like you actually, like you don't belong and you are thinking too critically about something. How do you maintain your sanity in these spaces when people are constantly gaslighting you?
For me, it had to be my friends. It had to be people who were outside of the institution, I say the institution being student government, because I mean, there's a larger institution I'm a part of, which is Miami University, but people who are outside of student government, who aren't as engaged, like who aren't engaged to the level that I am, and talking about this to them and having them reassure me the work that I'm doing is correct. No matter how much I'm being gaslit, no matter how much I'm getting resistance, the work that I'm doing is transformative. I had to have that reassurance. That's just for me with my anxiety and the mental health issues that I struggle with. I deal with a lot of telling myself that I'm not doing this. Oh, I shouldn't fight these people, this, that, and the third, basically pushing myself into submission, when in reality, the work that I'm doing is needed at this institution, because who else is going to do it? I don't know who else is going to do it. And so for me, I had to step away and like utilize my friends and utilize my community around me to support me, but also utilizing my own like cabinet and saying like, hey, like, how can I delegate this work? How can I give this to someone else to deal with? How can I tell this person who's emailing me to go somewhere else and direct them somewhere else? But mostly it was around my friends. Like having to have that support system was very much needed. Like face masks are great, bubble baths are great, but having someone to talk to and reassure you the work that you're doing is great, the work that you're doing is needed, the work that you're doing is impactful is very important. Because you need that community. You need that people behind you to kind of like push you up when you're about to fall backwards again, or you're about to fall back off the roof again. And so you need that support system in order to help you understand that what you're doing is increasing inclusive spaces. What you're doing is connecting students and connecting people in this community who need to hear and understand that these issues are happening in your community, and the work that you're doing is ultimately for them and not yourself. And so that's like kind of how I've had to like deal with self-care throughout this year, is just leaning upon the people in my community who I know are my support systems. So yeah.
I think for me, I would say that something I've noticed like in activist and organizing spaces is like a lot of activists are really amazing at coming up with these revolutionary thoughts, but do we put it in practice? No, we don't. And so I think about things like right now in work, in my working spaces, I've been grounding myself a lot in equity, like equity across the board, because I feel like we talk about equity a lot when we're trying to like, you know, center our communities and we're trying to help others and we're trying to care for people. And I'm like, if I truly understand and I internalize the meaning of equity, I'm going to start demanding equity in everything. So it's like, if I'm in a workspace and, you know, 4 of the employees there are like, you know, white, middle class, like, you know, their families have money, like we have completely different lifestyles, right? I'm not going to sit here and look at myself every day and be like, oh my goodness, why do I feel tired and Jane doesn't feel tired? Like, how come Jane works like every single day and like I feel burned out? Like, why me? I'm like, why am I comparing myself to someone that is up here, like in, you know, like as far as, you know, like survival looks like, and I'm over here like struggling daily. And like I have outside of this work, it's like I have family conflicts and like I am a Black woman constantly being exposed to Black death. And so it's like all of these things where I'm like, if I really like internalize what equity meant, and I sat there and I said, equitably, I deserve breaks. Like I deserve rest. I deserve to say like, no, I'm not jumping into that meeting right now. And no, like a Black person just died. I don't want to sit here and talk about and hear what you all think and what, you know, what my white peers think about this murder that just happened and hear them cry about that. I don't want to sit in this space because I don't need to sit in this space, because if we're centering equity in this workspace, then we should center equity with our employees as well. And this Black employee does not need to sit in this space for the sake of for the sake of my peace. And so I think that's something I've really been thinking a lot about. And like the other things that we say when we talk about like, you know, how restorative rest is, and just all of these different things that we kind of throw out there. I'm like, it's so beautiful, but yet we don't think about ourselves when we're doing this fight. Like we really don't center ourselves. And so I feel like a big component of self-care is remembering all of the things that we preach and the articles that we write and, you know, the fights that we fight to, you know, make sure that people are able to do this and that and that. Are you also doing that? Are you also a part of that? Because like you're fighting for bodies that look like you, but then you're not benefiting from that. And so I think a big part of self-care, because it needs to just be more than just like this phrase that, you know, got, you know, scooped up into pop culture. It really needs to be actions and understanding and us saying this to like our employers. And like the essay I mentioned earlier, like I wrote this essay and I knew very well like my employers are gonna read this and be like, girl, are you throwing shots? And I was like, yes, I hope you do take it as me throwing shots respectfully, and like give me my break. So yeah, that's my thought on that.
That was beautiful. I'll take it from the sense, first off, I'll be completely honest. I'm probably one of the worst at self-care. I've always just been super bad at self-care. I'm the person that will go like Energizer Bunny until the battery just stop, and then I just like fall dead. And that's a perfect example of that is when we were doing the hunger strike, and I literally the third and final day I was like, I can't mental, like I probably should have been drinking Pedialyte this whole time. So like doing these things and going, you know, I think it's also important. Face masks, breathing's great. Sometimes it's just sleep. Right? You need to turn off your phone, you need to cut everything out, and you just need to go to sleep, right? You have to say, sorry, I needed to take some time for me. And I think it's so hard, especially as women and women of color, to actually do that, right? Because we feel as though the world is on our shoulders 24/7. And if we're not working, it's not going to get done. And I think that's something that I'm still as a young professional and something I struggle with, especially in college. I did not realize the world is going to still function without Destiny Dixon. Now, maybe they might not get that assignment, or they might not get this project they needed on time, or this Excel sheet or something. But you know what? For the sake of my sanity, for my mental health, to make sure I wake up in the morning, I'm going to take the time that I need, and I'm going to shut down and tune out the world. And that's even sometimes deactivating of social media, that's sometimes getting off Twitter, especially during electoral season. Like, that gets crazy. Sometimes it's even, as someone's from, Bible Belt, red state, and sometimes not talking to family members for a couple weeks that you have to deal with regardless, based off even, your own parents not realizing progressivism in, those spaces, even as people of color and trans bodies, right? And activism. I think it's another beautiful thing to recognize that not even our parents understand the importance of being inclusive, right? So you have to take those moments for yourself, or you're going to drive yourself insane doing this work. And it's so, so incredibly important. That self-care is hard, especially as women of color, self-identified, but you have to, breathe and take care of yourself at all times, or, you can get burnt out very easily.
And I will say, I'll just add, and I'll let any others add to this, but they want us to burn out. That's part of the conversation we're having. And the reason why self-care is revolutionary is not just because we need rest, but it's actually a political statement to say we deserve to rest. We deserve to be at peace in a world that makes us feel like we cannot be, right? Like, I think sometimes we miss that. So in this capitalistic world that we're in, we're often focused on productivity, and that's how we measure our self-worth and our value. And on the flip side of that, self-care is the exact opposite, right? So whenever we are trying to be intentional and do self-care, we're constantly thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not being productive. I could have been doing an assignment. I could have started a business. Like COVID-19, for example, everyone is like, where's your business? And it's, and I think it's so crazy how we expect people to just adjust to the fact that our whole world just transformed dramatically. People are now living at home. People have family members that are sick. And meanwhile, we expect people to still exert the same level of productivity as we did prior to COVID. And we demand that from people, actually. And we look down on people who don't do that, right? So rest is a political statement under these conditions. And I think you all are hitting on some pretty amazing points. And I hope that our audience is picking up on this and starts incorporating some of this into your day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely right. And the last thing I'll add, I think everyone's already hit the ball out of the park, but the last thing I'll add is, we're all adults. I'm going to swear really quick. I think there's nothing that waters my crops more than just getting a group of people together that fully support me and just bitching about our days. There's something so revolutionary about that. And just having, the people in your life that, fully support you, your authentic self, and love you, and be able to bitch to them about what this white colleague said at work today, what the social justice committee at our work is doing, and just talking about, this thing that we saw online, be able to just fully just vent about how our days have been is so revolutionary. And I also think too, and everyone touched on this too, but deadlines are a scam. And for so long, I would just and I still struggle with this too, of just I feel so bad, and I feel just oh, I missed that deadline, I should have been better, and oh, does someone say? Oh, no, it's just me. But deadlines are such a scam, because you know what? I have to remind myself always that there's probably a white man out there who does nothing more than his 9-to-5 job and goes home and does nothing. But we are expected to do our 9 to 5. We come home, we have our families, we have friends to take care of, we have communities that we're a part of, or that we are advocates to, that are hurting, that we're trying to reach out and be the best ally that we can, and doing the free labor that Pony and everyone talked about. And there's people out there who don't think like us, who don't do that work, who literally do what they're told and leave. So just being easy on ourselves, and Destiny said, just sleeping. I slept for 11 hours last night just because I was I got home from an event. I was just I don't need to do my emails. They can wait. I'm just gonna go to bed. And I think that's so revolutionary, and that's truly what waters our crops and keeps us going. So
I I did want to add in, I'm so sorry. I know we're trying to keep the ball rolling, but Rai said something about how like they do want us to burn out. And like that is so true. And I think about that a lot when we have the conversation about like, you know, when we talk about some of our elders not kind of being as radical as they were when they were younger, or not really, you know, being like a support system, or, you know, the conversation of like, oh, like, you know, young generation versus old generation. And I truly feel like that sometimes that, and not all elders, because there are definitely a good chunk of elders who are out here doing the thing and always supporting us and championing us. But I think when we do see the elders who are like, all right, peace out, like I'm gonna go, you know, sit in this, you know, lake house and like live the rest of my days off and just be myself. I think it's due to that, because they didn't get rest, you know, when they were doing that work. They didn't experience that. And even this summer with everything that happened in the Minneapolis riots, I remember when the riots were happening, like I was completely like fine. Like it was like my brain was like, go, let's go. And it was like working and waking up super early in the morning and going to bed at like 2 a.m. after dropping protesters off, and doing that for exactly 2 weeks straight, and taking like emptying out my bank account, my savings account, and doing that willingly. And like my mom was like, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing that. But I'm like, no, it's fine, because like this is the moment that we've like worked so hard for, and like we're here, and like we're going to fight for what we need, and all of this is going to happen. And then I think it was September, and I think another shooting happened or something else happened, and I remember sitting there and like I broke down during like a work meeting where like I just started bawling, because I was like, I don't think people understand how frustrating it is, because when we were doing this and we were very much aware that like we're gonna die, like it wasn't funny and it wasn't cute, and as much as like, you know, and like they're gonna write history books about it and be cool and make it sound fun, and then the next generation are gonna like be like, oh my God, that's amazing. But like in actuality, when like police are dragging you out of your car, like you're like, I'm gonna die and my mom will never see me again. But it's worth it, right? Like it's worth it for the movement. It's worth it for Black lives. It's all worth it. And I was like, and missing out on internships, and missing out on job opportunities, and, you know, losing your entire savings. And because I graduated in May, so it's like losing all the money I got from graduating to make sure my people were safe was all worth it. But then you're sitting here and it's happening again, and it feels like it didn't matter. Like you didn't matter. And it's such a frustrating emotion to feel like none of that mattered. Like the world's going to continue. And in fact, and I said this to some of my colleagues, I was like, in years to come, the same thing they did with the Great Depression, where they said, oh, they wrote all about white people and how white people survived the Great Depression and how they did all these things, and they never talked about how Black folks were over here struggling and how somehow we still were able to come back. Instead, they say, oh, the Black community is lazy, they're poor, they're low income, they don't make enough money, they don't do this, they don't like to work. And they don't talk about the fact that so many Black people in the Great Depression got fired from their jobs just to make room for white people, jobs that before then white people didn't even want to work. They don't talk about that. They don't talk about the Black families who are struggling. And I'm like, and that's what's going to happen with this moment. They're going to look at us and say, wow, look at all the white students, even in COVID-19, who were able to go ahead and go into Harvard, and they had all these internships, and they were able to work, and they were able to survive. And they're not going to talk about the fact that all those Black kids put their entire lives on pause during that summer to save ourselves, to protect our communities. And now we're all sitting here with nothing in front of us because we thought, you know, it's all going to be worth it. And white kids get to continue their lives, and they get to continue being in their internships, and then they get to use our work and write op-eds about it and talk about how, oh my goodness, Black Lives Matter. And that week that I did this cool thing with, like, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, and like, let me write to my college and get, you know, into that and get scholarships. And like, that's what's going to happen. And it's such a frustrating experience. And so when I think about like some of our elders who get to a point where they're like, I'm good, I'm done now, I'm like, it's because of burnout. Like, it's because we weren't, you know, focusing on like, how do we put a pause and say, hey, you've been doing this for 3 days. Go ahead and sleep. Please take a break. Like, it's fine to rest. Like, the movement will continue. Like, Black lives will always, every single day matter. This moment is not like the only moment, you know, like, and so I think like that's so important. And when we don't have that, what Rai said is true. When that's not a thing, they want us to die, because they were completely fine with the work that we were doing, but they also understood that, like, yeah, like, let them die, like, our kids won't, but they'll die, and that's fine. Or they'll get tired and they'll get exhausted, and they'll say, I don't want to do this anymore, and we'll continue. And then we have to restart everything and start over with new young activists who have to like relearn things, instead of having conversations from older activists saying, chill out, take a break, like, this is going to stress you out, like, how do we help you, you know, get to the place that you need to be. And so I'm sorry for taking up too much time.
No, you're great. You're putting on some awesome points. But I think something that's beautiful. This Ray talks about this in our internship. We lived literally during a double pandemic this summer, right? Like, we are literally, Black people were going through a double pandemic, and a lot, like, what is going on with everything on the protests and George Floyd, and to not even just Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and all these things, all the names that, you know, did not make the mainstream media. But on top of that, Black and brown people were losing their jobs, were having to drop out of school, were not doing internships, were having to find side gigs to help their parents pay for rent that they didn't think they had to do, and all these different types of things that will never be discussed because we don't have savings accounts, because that's a whole nother conversation of, you having that fiscal and economic, wealth that they've had for hundreds and thousands of years because our parents, were never given those opportunities because we were slaves. So, it's also to another thing that the system we were built upon was not made for us to succeed. And that's the society that we live upon, but also understanding, recognizing as activists that the society, especially these predominantly white institutions we all have gone to, is that they do not want us to succeed, right? They want us to get their degree so we can be a percentage marker that said, hey, we had a Black girl, right? That was right there. Look at all those great pictures we took of her during her time at this institution, right? The reality, not talking about what the blood, sweat, and tears and the microaggressions that she had to face, or they had to face to get through these situations, I think is something that, will never, ever be written properly in the history book, right? Well, probably no one will ever recognize and understand what is going through on a daily basis, especially as, within our time in society. And it's so, so difficult. And it just reminds me, you're speaking, Tony, about the March on Washington this summer. I had an opportunity of going to, and a 65-year-old man came up to me and said, thanks for being here. He said, I never thought in my day and time that we would still have to be coming back here in this fight for history, right? And I think the summer reminded a lot of parents and a lot of family members, it was the first time that they had been back on the streets since they were our age, right? That they didn't think they had to get back out of the streets with their children, fighting the same fight that they've been fighting in the 80s, the 60s, the 50s, or even prior to that, that this is a never-ending cycle that we will keep and always having to fight for something that we've been fighting for thousands of years and for centuries.
Wow. I am like soaking up all of this conversation. This makes me think about this quote by Malcolm X, who says, "We are not outnumbered, we are out-organized." And I reflect on this quote all the time, especially in moments where I feel like we're losing, or whenever I feel like our movement, like, for example, there's ebbs and flows in movements, right? Like movements aren't always on screen. The revolution will not be televised. So like in those moments, it's hard to feel like the work is still getting done and we're moving forward, right? And so Malcolm X's quote, "We are not outnumbered, we are out-organized." That is the reason why I brought you all here, because you are organizers on your campus. With the last 10 minutes that we have, if you all have specific strategies that you have used in your work, because this work is hard and we have to be strategic about it. Unfortunately that's the positions that we're put in, right? So what does it mean to be organized on campus, in your community, and what are some of the your high level words of advice and strategies that you have for the young people on this call who want to get involved or who are already involved and maybe have faced real hard resistance, and they're like, okay, how do I move next? Like if the administration said no, what's another ask? Or how can I move around? Like what are some of those strategies that you use on your campuses or in your communities?
I just wanted to jump in and say, and I always speak from a place of extreme empathy and people building, and I think there is a space in the movement for someone like that. I don't know if they've termed who that person is yet, but I'm that person. And what I always say when we're organizing and movement building is, I think it's really important at the start, whoever's doing that work, I think it's extremely important at the start to create community, because something that I always say is activism is the work of collectivist communities and cultures. So ethnic groups of people, so BIPOC, that's our form of, when we think policy versus activism, which I hate to separate them, but in white supremacy we do. But it's activism and organizing is collective. It's a very collective effort. And in collectivism, we understand family, we understand community, we understand connection. I think sometimes because of, over the years how things are going, and even, policy and activism kind of coming together. I think sometimes when we think about, organizing, it's very much like, oh, okay, we're just gonna like set up, we're gonna set this thing up and we're gonna do it, and we're gonna go. But it's like, no, a part of like being in space with people, being in community with people, is allowing them to be themselves, and also like, cultivating that type of space where people feel safe here. And so I think that's very important, because when we learn like what makes you feel safe in this space, then we learn who are the activists out there who are willing.
She was preaching so hard we lost Pony.
Oh, no, we lost Pony. We'll get her back on. Someone else can.
Yeah.
You are back, Pony, and the audience is like, come back, please.
I got kicked out. I'm so sorry. I don't hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. I'm not sure what's happening. My apologies. But yeah, so I just would say, for me, I think it's very important, as like whoever is out there doing like organizing or thinking like I want to start something, like start there, like with the Minnesota Youth Activist Alliance, which, like I said, I co-lead earlier. It's something that I was very intentional, where I said, like, everyone coming into this space, I want you all to feel like you know each other, and you have an understanding of each other, and we know like what each other is comfortable with and not comfortable with. Outside of just doing organizing work, like, we're also sitting here and talking about like, how was your week? Like, how was your day? What do you need support in? What do you need to be uplifted in? Because that's like also a part of organizing, right? Like, a lot of us are people experiencing marginalization in these spaces. So it's like important to also have like what's happening in your day to day. Like, if one of my members is, struggling financially, and we're over here helping everyone else in the community, but then like a member of this organization can't even receive help, or doesn't even know how to tell like the group, like, hey,
Oh no. Technology is something.
y'all, I'm gonna sit this one out. I'm gonna let y'all say it, because y'all know what y'all doing. I trust y'all. I co-sign everything.
I'll go really quickly. I think the biggest thing is also infrastructure. I think that's one of the biggest things that I recognize when starting my work at University of Oklahoma, is if you do not have some infrastructure in place, is the system is going to get dismantled by the white folks. Let's just be honest. One of the great examples of this is that we had something called OU Unheard, which is a series similar to what the Black Emergency Response Team was, but it literally died out from the institution, basically, but making all the graduating seniors leave, and we didn't have the infrastructure to keep that organization going. So it was later built upon 5 years later to what we have currently in place. So one of the biggest things is, as a graduating senior, we wanted to make sure that we had an infrastructure that it would not only just go for a year or two after you graduated, but also keep going continuously, and this be a true organization on campus that's fighting. Because let's be honest, this work is going to keep going on for years and years and years. So making sure we have a group and voices, that it's established organization, making sure y'all are driving forces, because it takes time. These things don't get changed overnight. It doesn't just happen with a click of a, I don't know. Anyway, thinking of a word, but it doesn't happen overnight. And so it's important to have infrastructure, but also bringing in people that, everyone that wants to get involved, bringing in the young folks, bringing in the graduating folks, bringing in, people that are just within the community, creating relationship coalitions with other organizations on campus that are also fighting for some of the most similar things, like different minority groups, making sure you have an infrastructure in place, because your organization administration will.
My headphones just died. I'm having issues. We're getting to the end. I'm having issues, but somebody else can go ahead. My headphones just died.
Oh no, go ahead, Janie.
I think for me, as I'm sitting here and hearing Destiny and Pony's like answer, I'm just trying to figure out what I want to say. But I think for me, when I'm thinking through my 4 years, I think the two advice points I would give, with particularly students organizing, have a historian. That's a big thing. Have someone who is tracking the conversations you're having, the publications you're putting out. Have someone who is putting that in a database, so that when you're looking at continuing that movement and passing down that movement to underclassmen, or passing that movement back to people who are younger activists, they know where to go with and seeing what has worked and what didn't work when you're fighting this fight. I think another thing I want to talk about is like the sharing of knowledge and sharing of information across your community. I think for me, in my experience, just talking to other student leaders and other student advocates and other student activists about their interactions with other student leaders, their interaction with administrators, to understand the relationships they have or the interactions they have, to understand who's an administrator who's in our corner and who's an administrator who's not in our corner. Who are the people who are fighting for, who are with us, and who are the people who are against us? Because when you have that sharing of information, you understand what are the stakeholders in my community who will help push this narrative forward. Who are the stakeholders in the community who will sit there and fund these efforts and support these efforts in our community. And so when I look at like the sharing of information, the knowledge, and the historian, it's just like keeping track of information, because information in these movements, things move fast. People like move fast, information moves fast, knowledge moves fast, just messages move fast. Keeping track of that helps you move forward so that you know what you're getting, so that you know what has worked and what hasn't worked in the past. And so that's the advice I would give, just tracking that, having a historian, sharing knowledge with people in your community. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And like, in addition to what everyone has said already, I think, if you are interested in becoming an activist or an organizer, I think, I'm a very reflective person. So you have to do that hard work of reflecting your why. Like, why are you doing this work? What drives you and what you are passionate about? Because oftentimes, especially for white folks, a red flag that I see is like, why do you want to be an organizer and activist? They're like, oh, I just wanted to help other communities. Like, I just want to help others. That's a red flag, because we all have a stake in whatever decisions are being made locally, state, or federally. And when a person is just like, oh, I don't have a personal stake in this, I just want to help other communities, it comes from a place of privilege, because they're saying that the decisions that are being made actually don't really affect me. And there's not really a big difference in my life. I'm just trying to help others. I think that's a huge flag. We all have a stake in the work that we're doing. So identifying why we do the work and what we're passionate about and doing that reflective work is revolutionary before we even start becoming or in the process of becoming an activist. And I think too, there's no template in being an organizer or an activist on campus or off campus. So and if you have people and it comes back to like the shared knowledge of like, there's a lot of knowledge within our organizers and our elders that isn't passed on or like isn't always written down. And folks said it was like the moves fast. So making sure that you're contacting those organizers that you look up to, that are doing the work that you want to do. And it never hurts to just reach out to them to have a conversation about it on where to start. And you just need to start somewhere, and you can start anywhere, but just having that conversation and knowing who's in your corner and who's doing the work that you want to, I forget the mirror, like the work that you want to mirror is revolutionary.
Y'all, I am like so sad that our time has come to an end. I know, crazy. I just want to elevate a point that you just made, which is everyone has a stake in this, right? So we're not doing this for other people. We're doing this for ourselves and other people. And if you don't see that you have a stake in it, that's how you're able to tap out, right? If you don't actually see that it impacts you, you can say, oh, like, I'm just not going to do this anymore, right? It's not for other people. It's for each and every one of us. I am just so nourished by this conversation. Thank you to all of our panelists, you and Janie, Destiny, and Pony. All of our viewers and audience members, feel free to get in contact with them. We have all of their information on our website, and I will look forward to seeing you all on the next breakout track. Bye, everyone.